Hi guys, and welcome to our module on the pancreas. Now, in this module, we're talking about everything there is to know about the pancreas and its anatomy. We'll start with talking about growth, then we focus on the histology, and then finally the embryology of the pancreas. The pancreas is an abdominal organ, and that's the reason why we'll be talking about it under the module of abdomen. It is a joint exocrine and endocrine organ, and under the module of endocrine anatomy, we'll talk about the pancreas in terms of its endocrine function. With regards to its exocrine function, the pancreas is regarded as part of the digestive system. In terms of the location or within the abdomen, it is located retroperitoneally, except for a small portion of the pancreas, which we'll talk about later on. Within the abdomen, the pancreas tends to span uh, different aspects of the abdomen horizontally and vertically. Horizontally, the pancreas is oriented from the epigastric region towards the left hypochondrium. And then vertically, as you can see in the image, the pancreas tends to run from the first lumbar vertebrae here all the way down to the third lumbar vertebrae down here. The pancreas is regarded as an oblong or hook-shaped structure. Usually, the tail end of the pancreas tends to mirror the blunt edge of the hook, whereas the head of the pancreas tends to mirror the sharp end of the hook. And that is what we refer to as an oblong or hook-shaped structure. The pancreas tends to measure about 6 inches or about 15 centimeters in length, and it's regarded as an organ that is the perfect size to the size of a dollar, as shown in the image down below. Going into the gross anatomy of the pancreas, let's talk about the pancreas in terms of its different parts. The pancreas could be divided into four parts for ease of explanation. So the four parts of the pancreas includes from left to right, we have the tail of the pancreas in yellow, followed by the head of the pancreas in orange, then the neck of the pancreas in green, and then finally we have the head of the pancreas shown divided further into two aspects. The head of the pancreas has a part of it that tends to fold on itself, and that part is called the Eucynate process. But the Eucynate process is actually a part of the head of the pancreas, so we don't really talk about it as a separate part. So the four parts of the pancreas includes the head, the neck, the body, and the tail when we are oriented from right to left. Let's talk about the head of the pancreas. It is an expanded part of the pancreas that is related to the second part of the duodenum. It tends to form a C-shaped curve around the second part of the duodenum. And the end of that curve is what tends to give rise to that pointy aspect of the hook I talked about in the previous slides, which we know as the Eucynate process. Unlike the rest of the head of the pancreas, the Eucynate process is related posteriorly to the superior mesenteric vein. So, in terms of the relation, it's also important to remember the head of the pancreas is related to the second part of the duodenum medially, whereas the Eucynate process is related to the superior mesenteric vein posteriorly. The neck of the pancreas is one of the shorter aspects of the pancreas. It is the part that lies between the body and the head. In terms of its position within the abdomen, it is one aspect of the pancreas that is located on the transpyloric plane. Remember that we have a number of structures found at the transpyloric plane. In terms of the pancreas, that area is the neck of the pancreas. The neck of the pancreas is related anteriorly to the superior mesenteric vein, splenic vein, and then their union, which is the portal vein. So, where we have the Eucynate process related posteriorly to the superior mesenteric vein, in terms of the neck of the pancreas, is related anteriorly to the superior mesenteric vein, and then the union between it and the splenic vein to form the portal vein. Also, the neck of the pancreas is related anteriorly to the common bile duct. So this image portrays the two parts of the pancreas that we've spoken about. Starting with the head of the pancreas, you will notice that the head of the pancreas, in terms of what we talked about, is the aspect that is in relation to the duodenum. You could see that the duodenum is found lateral to it, so the head of the pancreas is found medial to the duodenum, and it tends to follow that C-shaped pattern that the duodenum tends to form, that curve that the duodenum tends to form. Another area of the head of the pancreas that you notice, that you rather not notice, is the uncinate process. And remember, I said the uncinate process is found posterior to the superior mesenteric vein. So this is the superior mesenteric vein. The aspect of the head of pancreas lost behind the superior mesenteric vein is the uncinate process, and that is not necessarily shown in this image. One other aspect of the pancreas you mentioned is the neck. The neck of the pancreas is the area outlined here. You can see the neck of the pancreas is found in front of the superior mesenteric vein. The vein goes behind the neck of the pancreas, and the neck of the pancreas is found behind the common bile duct. You can see the common bile duct running down just in front of the neck of the pancreas. Let's talk about the body of the pancreas. The body of the pancreas is the largest aspect of the pancreas. It extends between the neck and the tail, and it forms a major chunk of what we call the stomach bed. Remember that stomach bed are the posterior structures behind the stomach. The body of the pancreas is separated from the stomach by a large space we call the lesser sac or the mental bossa. The tail of the pancreas is the last aspect of the pancreas, the part of the pancreas related to the left hypochondrium. Now, it is the only aspect of the pancreas that is referred to as an intraperitoneal organ. The reason is because of the fact that, unlike the rest of the pancreas, the tail of the pancreas is surrounded entirely by peritoneum. So we say that the pancreas is the retroperitoneal organ, aside from its tail, which is the intraperitoneal. The tail of the pancreas is connected to a number of structures through peritoneal ligaments. Remember that peritoneal ligaments, like the splenorenal ligaments, tends to connect the pancreas to the spleen, and as well connecting that also to the kidneys. This is just an image showing us the body of the pancreas alongside its tail. You can see the body of the pancreas just lying directly behind the stomach. This is the body of the pancreas here. And you can see the tail of the pancreas extending all the way down towards the left hypochondrium. You can see how it is connecting the spleen on one side to the kidneys on the other side through the splenorenal ligament. This is the ligament here. And let's talk about the ducts. When we dissect the pancreas, what we would see would be pairs of ducts, large ducts that tend to drain pancreatic secretions coming from the exocrine portion of the pancreas towards the duodenum. And we have two major ductal systems that would drain pancreatic secretions into the duodenum. This includes the main pancreatic duct of Wilson and the accessory pancreatic duct of Santorini. And as shown in the image below, you can see how those ducts tend to drain into the duodenum. You can see the pancreatic duct in yellow running all the way down into the duodenum, connecting to the bile ducts to form uh, the major pancreatic duodenal duct of Vata, what we call the ampulla of Vata. Starting with the main duct, the main pancreatic duct tends to extend from the tail to the head of the pancreas. So it measures, or it tends to span the entire parenchyma of the pancreas because it's starting from the tail and ending from the head. Ending at the head, it drains all pancreatic structures or all pancreatic secretions from that area of the pancreas. It terminates by uniting with the bile duct. So it's the main pancreatic duct of wisdom that connects with the bile duct, and their connection will give rise to the particular pancreatic ampulla of Vata, what we just normally know as the ampulla of Vata. This ampulla of Vata, which is the combination of the bile duct and the main pancreatic duct, will terminate by piercing through the second part of the duodenum, and it forms an entry point we call the major papilla of the duodenum. So this is just the an image showing us the main pancreatic duct of Wilson. You can see how it starts from the tail of the pancreas, runs all the way down, draining all pancreatic structures or secretions within the pancreas, ending at the head of the pancreas. And at the head, it tends to communicate with the common bile duct. That connection between the common bile duct here and the main pancreatic duct of Wilson would give rise to the ampulla of Vata here. And the ampulla of Vata would terminate by piercing into the duodenum, the second part of the duodenum, giving rise to an opening called the major duodenal papilla. Now, the accessory pancreatic duct is found at the lower aspect of the pancreas, usually tends to be confined to the head and the ischial process of the pancreas. It drains just the distal aspect of the body and the head of the pancreas, and it terminates in a second opening in the duodenum. This opening tends to be regarded as the minor papilla of the duodenum. And contrast to the main pancreatic duct of Wilson, the accessory pancreatic duct of Santorini doesn't communicate with the bile duct. It ends just solely within the duodenum. So this is just an image of the two pancreatic ducts and their termination. You would notice that the main pancreatic duct, before it terminates, it tends to communicate with the bile duct, giving rise to the ampulla ovata and terminating at the major papillae. Whereas the minor or accessory pancreatic duct of Santorini tends to drain structures within the head and terminate just above where the ampulla ovata is terminating. So it terminates at a separate opening called the minor pancreatic or minor papillae of the duodenum. Just one more, but a closer view, you could see the major papillae ending here, the combination of the bile ducts and the main pancreatic ducts forming the ampulla ovata will terminate at that major papillae. And you can see the minor papillae ending just above the major papillae. That is formed from the sole termination of the accessory pancreatic duct. You can see that also here. You can see the sole termination of the accessory pancreatic duct of Santorini. See how it runs all the way to the duodenum and end at the minor duodenal papillae of the duodenum. Whereas for the major papillae, you can see how it is formed from the union of the bile duct here and the major or main pancreatic duct here, and that combination gives rise to the ampulla ovata. One very important thing you notice is that there's a form of sphincter surrounding the hepatopancreatic ampulla ovata. That sphincter is called the hepatopancreatic sphincter, or what we call the sphincter of Oddi, and it allows or restricts movement of secretions from the pancreas and the bile ducts into the duodenum as well. Let's talk quickly about arterial supply to the pancreas. The pancreas is supplied by different vessels in the head, the neck, the tail, and the body. The head and the neck tends to be supplied solely by the superior pancreatical duodenal artery and the inferior pancreatical duodenal artery. These are arteries that come from the gastroduodenal artery and the superior mesenteric artery. The gastroduodenal artery itself is a branch that comes from the celiac artery. So it's just important to note that the pancreas is getting dual supplies from different aspects of the blood supply to the foregut and midgut. In terms of the body and the tail, the body and the tail of the pancreas is supplied from pancreatic branches coming from the splenic artery. This is the image that shows the blood supply to the pancreas. You'll notice that the body and the tail of the pancreas is supplied by a lot of branches coming from the splenic artery, as shown here. Whereas when we talk about the body and the neck, the head and the neck rather of the pancreas, that will be supplied by a combination of the superior and inferior pancreatical duodenal artery. Superior pancreatical duodenal artery, as shown here, will be coming from the gastroduodenal artery, which is a branch itself of the celiac artery. And then the inferior pancreatical duodenal artery, as shown here, is coming from the superior mesenteric artery, which is shown below. For the venous drainage, this is also distinct in terms of the regions. The head and neck of the pancreas is going to be drained by pancreatic veins draining into the superior mesenteric vein. The body and the tail of the pancreas is drained from the pancreatic veins that will drain into the splenic veins. The net supply to the pancreas comes largely from the celiac plexus. Since it's a visceral organ, it's going to be having dual innervations by sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers. The celiac plexus is usually a mixture of those. The sympathetic fibers supplying the pancreas comes from T6 all the way down to T12, whereas the parasympathetic fibers comes solely from the vagus nerve. The hepatic drainage of the pancreas is by the pre-exotic lymph nodes, and this include lymph nodes around the celiac trunk, around the superior mesenteric vessels, and around the splenic vessels. So these are celiac nodes, superior mesenteric lymph nodes, and the splenic lymph nodes. Now, remember at the beginning of the lecture, I made mention of the fact that the pancreas is a mixture of an exocrine and endocrine gland. And in terms of its histology, this is well played out in terms of the parenchyma of the pancreas. Parenchyma of the pancreas is composed of exocrine glands on one end, then endocrine glands usually sparsely distributed, and then stromal cells or connective tissue cells supporting them. And this is what shown in the image directly below. You would see some set of dark pinkish structure surrounding the entire image. These are largely exocrine glands, and you just notice just there's this very pale area at the center here. This pale area is a connection or collection of endocrine structures, endocrine gland, which is regarded as the islets of Langerhans. And then in between, or sparsely surrounding each of them, connecting each of them, we have collagen structures, which forms the stroma of the pancreas. You could see some collagen structures here connecting the glands. You could also see collagen structures here, very whitish in color, that tends to connect each of the different endocrine cells in the islet of Langerhans. The exocrine of the pancreas is going to form about 90% of the pancreas. It is composed of serous glandular tissues that are separated into lobules, and this is done by the presence of the connective tissues I showed in the previous slide. Collagenous septals are going to separate each of the glands from each other. A single lobule of an exocrine gland in the exocrine gland of the pancreas is made up of two major structures connected together. This would be the pancreatic acini. This is the site of production of pancreatic secretion. And then the pancreatic duct. This is the site of transport and modification of pancreatic secretion. So, starting with the pancreatic acini contains units of secretory cells. They're the areas shown in blue here. These are cells that are surrounding a lumen, and they're involved in production of digestive enzymes and fluid that will be part of the pancreatic secretion. Usually, the acini that are at the periphery are involved in the secretion of digestive proenzymes. So, enzymes that are involved in digestion, like pancreatic amylases and pancreatic lipase, alongside enzymes involved in breakdown of protein. And then Arsenal cells found centrally are involved in secretion of bicarbonate-rich pancreatic fluid. So while we have some arsenal cells that are involved in the production of enzymes, some are involved in production of fluid. So for example, the central arsenal cells are the ones that are found towards the duct, so they are found around this region. These are the ones that are involved in the production of bicarbonate-rich fluids, whereas the peripheral arsenal cells are the ones that are found here. These are the ones involved in the production of pro digestive proenzymes. Then one extra thing to note about is the fact that these cells are epithelial cells and they are lined by simple cuboidal cells. Hence the reason why they are involved in the production of different secretions. This is just to show us histology. You could see how the pancreatic acinar cells are outlined here. You can see how they are cuboidal in shape with very darkish cytoplasm and darkish nucleus to show that they are particularly mitotically active and also involved in production of proteins, in which eventually result in the secretion of pancreatic enzymes and different forms of bicarbonate-rich fluids. For the pancreatic duct, the duct tends to be cells surrounding a lumen, and they tend to be continuous with the pancreatic acini. The ducts that are immediately continuous with pancreatic acini are referred to as intralobular ducts. These intralobular ducts would interconnect to give rise to what we call an intercalated duct. Then several intercalated ducts would drain to form interlobular ducts. We start from intralobular to intercalated to interlobular. And then finally, a number of interlobular ducts would eventually form or merge to form to drain into either the main pancreatic duct of Wilson or the accessory pancreatic duct of Santorini, as spoken about before. One thing to also note about the pancreatic ducts is that they are also epithelial cells and they are lined either by cuboidal or columnar epithelium. This is an image of each of the ducts and the ductal system of the pancreas. You can see that the first set of ducts that are found in close proximity to the acini are referred to as the the intralobular ducts. From intralobular duct, we have the duct becoming intercalated, and then intercalated would eventually span out from interlobular duct. The interlobular duct would finally drain into the duct of the main duct of Santorini or the duct of Wilson, which is the main duct of Wilson, rather the accessory duct of Santorini. Let's talk about the endocrine compartment of the pancreas. We'll talk about this in a greater detail when we get to the endocrine module under anatomy. But in the case of this module, we'll just briefly talk about it. The endocrine aspect of the pancreas forms about 1 to 2% of the pancreas. So it is made up of sparsely distributed set of island cells that are found embedded in different aspects of the pancreas. This set of island cells are regarded to as the islets of Langerhans. They usually tend to receive about 20% of blood supply, regardless of their very small population. They receive about 20% of blood supply because of their hormonal function. So what are these cells? The different cells that are forming the islets include cells including the alpha cells, the beta cells, the epsilon cells, delta cells, and the pancreatic polypeptide cells. And each of these cells are arranged in different fashion within the islets. Usually the alpha cells are usually found in the periphery. The beta cells are usually found at the center, and then the other cells are just sparsely distributed within the islets. This is something I will revisit later on in the module of endocrinology, but just for you to note, alpha cells are usually going to be in production or involved in production of glucagon. Beta cells are involved in the production of insulin, which is a very important hormone for glucose metabolism. Delta cells are involved in the production of somatostatin. Epsilon cells involved in production of ghrelin, and then the pancreatic polypeptides are involved in production of pancreatic peptides. Let's end this module by discussing embryology. The pancreas is formed from the foregut alongside other structures like the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, part of the duodenum, and the esophagus and the trachea and lungs. In terms of its formation, there are three major steps involved in the formation of the pancreas. These steps include the formation of the pancreatic buds, fusion of the two pancreatic buds form, and then the fixation of the pancreatic buds to form a retroperitoneal structure. Let's start with the formation. The pancreas tends to develop largely from the foregut, and it forms from two major buds that comes ventrally and dorsally from the foregut. These are referred to as the dorsal pancreatic buds and the ventral pancreatic buds. They are going to emerge from the caudal part of the foregut. So while the cranial part of the foregut gives rise to more proximal structures like the esophagus and the stomach, the caudal part of the foregut gives rise to lower structures like the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the duodenum. Now, the ventral pancreatic bud, in terms of its derivative, would form the head and the uncinate process of the pancreas, whereas the dorsal pancreatic bud gives rise to the upper part of the head, the neck, the body, and then the tail. So, dorsal pancreatic bud is forming major portions of the pancreas in the adult structure. For the next step of the formation of the pancreas, we have what we call fusion. So the dorsal and the ventral pancreatic bud would have to fuse to give rise to one single pancreas. This occurs when the duodenum starts to rotate. So if you remember the module under the small intestine, we talked about the formation of the duodenum. We talked about how it tends to rotate um, clockwise during its formation, and as it rotates, it gives rise to a C-shaped structure. That C-shaped structure accounts for the C-shaped pattern of the duodenum on the head of the pancreas. As the duodenum is rotating during embryology, the ventral pancreatic bud would also rotate alongside the duodenum, and it is carried dorsally together with the bile duct, and then it runs all the way to the back to fuse with the dorsal pancreatic bud. And that fusion will give rise to a single pancreatic bud that will further develop into the adult structure. This is an image showing us the development of the pancreas. You can see at the beginning we have the dorsal aspect of the foregut forming a bud. The bud would include the hepatic diverticulum and then the gallbladder as well. But you notice that there's also the ventral pancreatic bud forming from that bud. And then aside that, you have at the back of the foregut the dorsal pancreatic bud also being formed. Then subsequently, because of the rotation of the duodenum during its development in the clockwise pattern and a C-shaped formation at the end of rotation, we have the ventral pancreatic bud rotating dorsally to fuse with the dorsal. So the ventral fuses with the dorsal pancreatic bud, giving rise to one single pancreatic bud. And that single pancreatic bud, you can see it forms the C-shaped pattern together with the head of together with the second part of the duodenum. After the fusion occurs, the third step of the formation of the pancreas is fixation. After the single pancreatic bud is formed, what happens is that the visceral peritoneum surrounding the pancreatic bud will be lost posteriorly. This, as a result, would ensure that the pancreas becomes a retroperitoneal organ. So, because the pancreas was initially intraperitoneal, because it was initially surrounded by peritoneum entirely, and during formation, it has the posterior peritoneum being lost, merging with the back of the abdomen. We usually say that the pancreas is a secondary retroperitoneal organ because it was initially intraperitoneal, but during development it lost that status and became retroperitoneal. So we see it's a secondary retroperitoneal structure. The only part of the pancreas that remains intraperitoneal is the tail of the pancreas. That is important to remember. So this is just showing us the embryology of the pancreas once more. You could see that this embryology also tends to mirror the embryology of the duct, as the ventral pancreatic duct and bud tends to contain the accessory pancreatic duct, whereas the dorsal pancreatic bud tends to contain the main pancreatic duct, and that is clearly shown in the image here. What are some clinical significances to remember about the pancreas? This includes the inflammation of the pancreas called pancreatitis. We have what we call annular pancreas, in which the pancreas during development forms around during rotation and fusion forms a ring around the duodenum, and that ring can compress the duodenum, leading to intestinal obstruction. We could also have some other conditions like cancer of the pancreas or cancer of the head of pancreas, which could also lead to obstruction of the duodenum and obstruction of the bile duct, and which could present as extrahepatic jaundice. And then finally, we have a condition called cystic fibrosis, in which we have issues that could occur to the lungs, pancreas, and even to the liver. So this is just an image showing us the pancreatitis, which is the inflammation of the pancreas. It will present as epigastric pain because remember that the pancreas tends to span the epigastric region all the way down to the left hypochondrium. So usually pain in the epigastrium could also mirror or signify an issue with the pancreas occurring. This is an image of an annular pancreas. You can see the pancreas surrounding not just um, the duodenum, but also obstructing it. As a result, this will lead to intestinal obstruction because fecal contents or even food contents could not pass through the duodenum down to the jejunum as a result of this obstruction. Finally, we have the an image showing us the tumor or the cancer of the head of pancreas. This cancer could eat up all the way down to the duodenum, but most importantly, this tumor tends to obstruct the bile duct, and as a result, it will lead to extrahepatic um, jaundice. You can see that bile would accumulate within the bile duct, and then you have bilirubin spilling into the blood as a result, and that will lead to jaundice occurring. And that concludes our module on the pancreas.